Good morning. Welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting, or good afternoon, I should say. I'm Councillor John Ward, and I will be chairing the Planning Committee meeting today. On the top table, we have at the back Dave Wilson from Highways. On the front table, officers Peter Kerrison, Glenn Beaumont, Tracy Lincoln, and Dawn Matthews. And I'll now read out the fire safety notice. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so if the fire alarm sounds, we will evacuate the building. There are two fire exits from this room. One is through the double doors where you came in, and the other is to the right of the stage that leads to an external fire escape. Please note that you should not use the lift in the event of a fire. In the event of an evacuation, we meet to the left of the driveway at the main entrance to Thorpe Lodge. This meeting is being live streamed. Members of the public are welcome to film proceedings as long as they are not disruptive to the conduct of the meeting. If anyone wishes to film or record the meeting, could you please identify yourselves now? Thank you. Please can you all ensure your mobile phones and electronic devices are turned to silent. Councillors, please do not use your mobile phone while the committee is in session. We will have comfort breaks at various times throughout the meeting. If you must use your mobile, then please leave the room. However, you will appreciate that this could result in you not being able to vote on the matter under discussion at the time you leave the room. The order of business is as set out on the agenda. Members of the public can only speak if prior arrangements have been made, in accordance with the Council's scheme of public speaking. The time allocated is a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker, / parish council, with a maximum of 15 minutes per category. Only people who have been registered to speak will be able to address the committee. The order will be as follows. The planning officer will present the application. Public speakers will then be asked to present their case, followed by questions from members of the committee to clarify something the speaker has said, and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The order of public speaking is parish town council first, followed by objectors, and finally supporters, for example, the applicant or agent. Council members who are not members of this committee will then be invited to speak for the allocated time of a maximum of 5 minutes for each speaker. This will be followed by questions from members of the committee. Again, these questions will only be to clarify something the speaker has said, and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The committee will then discuss and determine the application. Finally, there is no provision for members of the public to circulate documents, photographs, etc. at the meeting. Are there any questions before I start the meeting, please? No, thank you. Right, we'll go to agenda item 1, declarations of interest from councillors, please. Are there any? No, none, thank you. And apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Vincent, Councillor Adams, whose substitute is Councillor Nurden, from Councillor Folger, and from Councillor Riley, and his substitute is Councillor Holland.
Okay, thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of September. Councillors, for accuracy, are there any points, please? Are you happy that I sign those minutes of a true record of that meeting? Thank you. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? No? Thank you. Then we go straight on to the applications. The first application, starting page 11 of your papers, 2022-0034, the Raw Dinosaur Park. Hand you over to Officer Glenn Beaumont.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Application 2022-0034, a hybrid application, part full, part outline at Raw Dinosaur Adventure. Visited the site this morning, so I'm hopefully not going to dwell too long on some of the things that we've seen, but I'll go through it nevertheless in as precise fashion as I can. In terms of the key considerations, these are the principle of development, landscape and visual impact, noise, and arising from the last planning meeting, the sustainable means of travel from the sustainable means of travel to and from the site. In terms of updates, on your supplementary schedule, you'll have seen comments from Royal Norfolk Golf Club about it not being prepared to allow footpath go through its land to serve the site, and the Highway Authority's response to that. There has been a further response from the Highway Authority this morning, clarifying its position further following some correspondence involving councillors Wymark, Peck and Hempsall in their capacity as county councillors. And the ultimate view on that is that while the county council would like to see a footpath provided, ultimately it doesn't feel like it would be able to defend an appeal if it was put in that situation. Having said that, I've got Dave Wilson from Highways to your left, my right, and should you have any questions on highway matters, I'll invite him to take those from you at the end of the presentation, if that's okay. So you know where the site is, so let me just flip straight through to some of the things that will allow you to get your bearings. While we're looking at trees, I mentioned during the site visit that there was a large TPO in place around the site. This is probably going to be quite difficult for you to see, judging from where you're sat, but if you're able to follow the cursor, this is the application site just here. Yeah, you're following that? Okay. All these areas here this is a woodland TPO. This is a woodland TPO. This is Western Hall Drive coming along the left-hand side just here, going up to the junction with the A1067, and also individual trees throughout the site. So the tree belt that I referred to on site, we've got each of the trees, the existing trees is the subject of an individual TPO, and also the veteran tree, which we'll see a photo of shortly, and you may have observed on site, is also the subject of an individual TPO. So that's more for completeness than anything else, since I raised it during the site visit. So if we get back to the main part of the presentation, this is just to remind you of what you would have seen on the approach to the Dinosaur Park. Just make it a bit bigger. So this is the approach from the direction of Lenwade, Great Witchingham. Access in the distance there. This is the view looking back towards north. This is the view from the south. So as you go towards Morton Lane, looking back. And then this is the visibility looking left or south out of the site, out of the main access. Again, a lot of this is just refamiliarizing yourself with what you've already seen. This is the access into the site from Western Hall Road. And let's have another look at the site plan. So here we are. We've got the existing overflow car park, the veteran tree that's the subject of a TPO, the proposed overflow car park where Mr. Jackson and I and Mr. Jennings were stood at various viewpoints trying to show you the extent to which it extended out into the field beyond the existing car park. So if you like, it's this sort of Tetris block going into the site, with a moth meadow to provide ecological enhancements in the green area in the centre, an infiltration lagoon in the blue circle. The existing trees running as a belt through the centre of the site to be strengthened with further planting. And then as we took the walk through the site, we ended up at the top end of the site, which is the eastern side, because the north is to the left of the screen, by way of reminder. So north to the left, south to the right. And then we're confronted with an entrance archway, and then the rides cascade and the features cascade down the slope in front of us. So again, just going through it, see the change in levels of 8 meters. We'll see a sectional drawing later on in the presentation. That's the winter view of the site as well. To confirm as Mr. Goymer said, the applicant during the presentation that he did to members last month proposed hours of operation from 10 o'clock till 5:30 in the afternoon, and from the Easter holidays to October half term. And I'm standing probably at the junction between the ecological enhancement area and part of the proposed car park just here. Phases 1 and 2 are just beyond the row of trees on the left-hand side. and this is the veteran tree, just about make it out on the right-hand side of the screen just here, and the access beyond that from Western Hall Road. So clearly the landscape impacts are a significant issue to be borne in mind. We walked around the site, we considered the impacts locally and from neighbouring properties. So we've got the properties on Morton Lane to the south, using the marker of the poplar trees. And as my report sets out, or the original report sets out, I consider that these impacts are localised. This is just giving you an indication of some of the features. So we've got the archway that leads into the site at the eastern top end, which is 3 meters high. You've got the climbing dome, and you can probably just make out some of the highlighted areas on the right hand, in the inset box on the right hand side. Jumping pillows with the dinosaur feature above them, going up to 3 meters in height. 2 of those, one next to the volcano ride and one near the tracked ride, which is phase 2. So the ones we're looking at the moment are all phase 1. Got the teacups ride as well, which will be next to the northern section of phase 1. And then we've got a water play area as well, which sits roughly centrally in phases 1 and 2. Got a slide climbing tower feature, which is 6.6 meters in height. And again, that is roughly sort of centrally within the site, just off center, sorry, I should say. And then we've got a food kiosk on the right-hand side, just here, and the canopy. So this is the canopy for the food kiosk, which goes up to just shy of 5 meters in height to the top of the post. So that's just that bit there. And then we've got a toilet block alongside the western boundary as well, which will be just over 2.5 meters in height. Perhaps the most visible feature within the site itself will be the drop volcano ride, which will be 10 meters high, with anyone who wishes to go on it being able to go up to a height of 8 meters before dropping down. As I said on site, the view of people on the ride will primarily view into the site. So the direction will be kind of across in a diagonal way across the site, like so. Hopefully you can make out that cursor just there. So this open part will face within the site and not towards neighbouring properties. The tracked ride that I refer to as a spaghetti loop, which is phase 2. It's the only part of phase 2. And then the departure area for that is a covered structure. All of these have a dinosaur theme, and this is 4.5 meters in height. Looking at the sections across the site, I think there might be a better one in the next slide. So if I might, I'll just scoot straight to that one. So this is where we gathered at the top of the site, having walked through the existing Dinosaur Park trail. You can see the way everything is a sort of fairly uniform in terms of its profile above the ground. So there's nothing that tends to poke above anything else. All follows the contours of the slope. 10 meter high volcano ride just there. And then the opposite view. So that's when you would be, if you were stood at the bottom of the overflow car park, your view would be the bottom profile just there. So we turn now to some of the impacts on the appearance of the area and also on neighbouring properties. So here we are on Morton Lane, just outside Keeley Cottage. During the course of the visit, I asked you to have a look at the views that you may see as you travel along Keeley Cottage. Hopefully you took account of those as we were walking down. As we were walking down Morton Lane. My view remains that any views will be no more than glimpsed and certainly won't have a significant impact on the character and appearance and the landscape character of the surrounding area. From within the site, this is taken from looking at Round the Woods glamping site. So this is one side of the fence. And again, this is the volcano ride is probably going to be about here where the cursor is. Clearly that's an estimate. We saw some of the yurts that were in place there, but these are not all of them are up. And the applicant, the neighbour, Kate Simons pointed out where she wished to build the yurt just on the right-hand side, where I've highlighted here. But we walked up here and diagonally across and then broke out into the woods. So you would have seen these two at least. Long distance views of Fairfield House, which is where Round the Woods is based. You can see these red dots or red shapes. If I just zoom in here, perhaps too much. That's possibly a bit better, which perhaps gives you an indication of the anticipated level of visibility of some of those features when viewed from the direction of the south. So you can see they're fairly well screened by existing planting. And as was pointed out during the course of the visit, the woods, Round the Woods, is owned by the Simons family. But nevertheless, taking account of what we're seeing there, it just reinforces my view that from that direction, the development won't have a significant impact on the appearance of the area. Going to the next slide. So this is near the boundary of Round the Woods with the application sites. Again, if we can just use this tree as an orientation point, and this is on the diagonal. So these are the trees that are that central belt running through the site. There's an emergency track that runs the other side of the fence. And that's going to be, sorry, this, yeah, it's the other side of the fence, our side of the fence, adjacent to the fence. And there will be a 2-meter high hedge planted along that boundary, which in time will no doubt grow and mature. And again, these are just different viewpoints along the boundary that we saw last month from Round the Woods. And doubtless you would have taken account of your own observations as you were walking around the site as well. So nothing further for me to add here. So we now move to Toad Cottage, and this is the area behind the stables that you saw. Poplar trees as your orientation points here. So you can see glimpsed views of the site in the distance, and within that area there, the applicant is looking to erect a bund that will be a maximum of 2 meters in height. So it will grade up from 1 meters on the left-hand side as we look at this, and then going up to 2 meters in height adjacent to these trees. That bund will have 12 heavy-duty trees planted on top. They will be 4 to 4.5 meters in height, and also on the bund there will be 1,095 1-meter high whips that will in time grow. Within the understory of these poplars and this part of the woodland, a further 1,000 or so plants, trees, whips are going to be installed to improve the understory element of it. And it's important to say at this point that the purpose of the bund is to elevate the planting, not to provide noise mitigation and not to act as a landscape barrier. It's to elevate the planting. So there's no requirement from a noise mitigation point of view. As we go using some of the wireframes that were provided as part of the landscape impact assessment, we've got without the red marks on the bottom, and I shall zoom into those. So I don't think anybody is suggesting that the development will be completely invisible from any particular vantage point, but there will be elements of it that are visible. Clearly we can see that just here, but the mitigation being proposed as part of the landscaping scheme will contribute towards views being filtered and mitigating landscape impacts. Here we are at land to the rear of Keeley Cottage, and again we walked up this area just here. So this is just confirming what you saw. The bund, sort of wishbone shape, will be about in that area there. A slightly more distance view, slightly to the north of where we went. So again, you can see the slope of the site, and some of the elements of the development will be visible. But again, in time, with planting, that will help to soften the impacts of it. As the report sets out, there's some distance between the properties on Morton Lane, the dwellings on Morton Lane, and the application site. So in the region of 180 to 190 metres. So in that respect, the visual impact of the development, I don't consider will be unneighbourly in view of those distances provided and the landscape. And here we are looking at the landscape scheme. Over 25,000 trees and plants being installed by the applicant throughout the existing overflow car park, the proposed overflow car park, hedging along the boundary, the western boundary, next to the access drive, the emergency access drive. We've got the ecological enhancement moth meadow in that section there. The tree belt being strengthened across the site, planting throughout amongst the rides. Perhaps if I zoom in, that might help. So it gives you the idea that the applicant has thought carefully about how they want this site to be absorbed into the landscape, and the planting to soften the features as well. And then phase 3 at the moment, we don't know what's going in there. That'll be led by customer demand or market demand, and doubtless we'll see details of that in the future if this application is successful. The proposed bund, I beg your pardon, around the woodland to the south of the site. And then if we move on to the next slide, we'll see some of the sections. So as was discussed during the visit, goes up to 1 metre, goes up to 1 metre along this section here, like so, with planting above. And then as it progresses towards the edge of the poplar trees, it kind of wraps around it in a wishbone shape, going up to 2 metres in height, just there. So if you follow the contours, and then these circles are the proposed positions of those heavy duty type trees that are to be planted. So 4 to 4.5 metres in height. So when looking, we're on the application site here, application site of the site. We're looking towards Toad Cottage in the distance. See that it's some distance away. And then as we're travelling along Western Hall Road to the south of the access, good levels of screening provided along the highway boundary. And you can make out the shapes underneath, which suggests that the site's some of the features aren't going to be particularly visible within wider views. And then to refresh your memory all over again, here we are with the site plan. So I've discussed the potential landscape impacts. So I'm not going, and you've obviously seen the site and you can make your own mind up about that. So I'm not going to say anything more. Noise issues are discussed in the supplementary report, which you've all read. We've got Alex Grimmer here today. So if there are any noise questions, he'll be able to assist in those. But just to emphasize the point that he has seen all the correspondence and reports regarding noise that have come forward. He is content with the recommendations that have been made, which include the introduction and implementation of a noise management plan. And the key points for that are set out in the addendum report that you have in front of you. In respect of the footpath, at the top of the presentation, I referred to the supplementary schedule and the comments of the golf club, and that they're not prepared to have a footpath going through their site. Along Western Hall Road, as you saw in the addendum report, I have my own concerns about that, and the amount of tree removal that would likely be required to facilitate that, and also the fact that those trees are protected trees as well. So I'm not in favour of that. So having regard to all of the matters raised, I consider that the principle of development at this site is acceptable. There are significant economic benefits to be had regard to in terms of the amount of investment and the employees being employed by the applicant, and overall the application is considered to be acceptable, subject to the conditions and subject to ecological matters being resolved with Natural England and our Ecology and Biodiversity Officer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officer, please? No? In that case, I will call forward Ruth Goodall, Western Longville Parish Council, please. Thank you. And when you're ready, you have 5 minutes. If you could move the microphone a little closer, please.
How's that? That's
Well,
okay?
right in front. Thank you.
Right. My name is Ruth Goodall, and I'm here today representing... Okay, thank you. Representing Western Longville Parish Council. And can I begin by thanking the Planning Committee for deferring their decision until after today's visit, which I hope you found as useful as I did. Having spent the morning visiting the site, I think one of the things that struck me most forcibly was the contrast between what Kate Simmons is trying to do with her business and what we were looking at in terms of the raw proposal. It emphasised for me the significant change that this application represents. The land in question, which was once a deer park, will become a development with a teacup and volcano ride, drop ride, and further rides planned in the future. It seems to me that Raw has travelled a long way from its starting point of embedding dinosaurs in the natural environment. And that part of the site still seems to me to be eminently successful. I think there are legitimate grounds now for concern about the shift to a more Pleasurewood Hills style theme park and therefore its impact on local residents. At the first meeting, Raw made much of its success and expertise as a leisure industry company, and Western Longville Parish Council has always welcomed the economic benefits that it's brought to the area. But, and it is a big but, it should not be at the expense of near neighbours. Being a good neighbour should also be a measure of success. I was very much hoping that following the last meeting, Raw would come forward with proposals which acknowledge the concerns of residents, but they seem rather to have doubled down by submitting documents suggesting there'll be no visual intrusion and that nothing further is required beyond a noise management plan. So I'm afraid for us, the key questions remain. The first question, how will neighbours be protected if there are no safeguards, no conditions associated with the noise management plan? There can be a world of difference between modelling and the reality on the ground. The assertion that monitoring is difficult to do doesn't make it a reason for not doing it. And I don't understand the reluctance to monitor the noise management plan's effectiveness, since if the plan is working, it will be cost-free. The second question, when the leaves fall from the trees, will residents find themselves looking at teacups and a volcano for 6 months of the year? The current proposals, as were explained this morning, were not intended to screen the site, and nor were they intended to reduce the impact of the noise. If bunding and fencing would resolve the problem permanently as far as residents are concerned, why not do it now as part of the development? The one chink of light since the last meeting was in the report from David Wilson from Community and Environmental Services, which suggested that there was a way in which a pedestrian and cycle access to Raw for both staff and students and staff and visitors could be provided. And as I said at the last meeting, I don't believe it is any longer justifiable for such a major attraction, which is looking to attract visitors from across East Anglia, to be only accessible by car. Western Longville still believes that this should be a condition of approval for this application. So, noise, visual intrusion, and access. The three issues, which if safeguards are put in place, will provide a measure of protection to local residents, staff, and visitors. In their absence, it's very difficult for Western Longville to support this application. And I suppose personally, the strongest impression that I'm left with after today's visit that somehow it just doesn't fit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do any councillors have questions for the speaker, please? No? Then if you'd like to resume your seat, please. And if David Harrod, Kate Simmons and Mark Hurry would like to take their seats, please. And if you decide between you which one's going first, and then once you start, you'll have 5 minutes each.
Yep. Hi, David Howard, speaking on behalf of the objectors and hopefully on behalf of 10 properties along Morton Lane on Western Hall Road. Subjects of bunding, initial subject. This morning's site visit will clearly have shown the layout of the land with a huge rise in elevation both ways towards the entrance to this site and towards properties on Morton Lane. The markers we placed there, the white markers, were a clear location of the proposed bunds, showing the height will be of no use whatsoever. The applicant has positioned their sight line from the lowest point on the track, giving the impression that the sub-bunds would be 1 to 2 meters in height. In reality, the 2 meter height bund would be just 1.3 meters. It's measured from the lowest point, so they're using the existing land to elevate the bund. Simply knee high and chest high is what they're showing. Visitors, together with proposed structures, will be clearly visible to all the residents. The proposed tree planting scheme to be added to this bunding would prove of no use whatsoever for many years, as the bunding height is totally inadequate. It's similar to what you see along the NDR, but with virtually no bund beneath. It appears Raw's budget was probably exhausted before local residents were even considered. This application should be withdrawn until they can afford suitable noise and visual mitigation. Suggested minimum bunding heights have been proposed. It's suggested by the planner's presentation that no restrictions should be imposed on their promised opening times. This means we will be exposed to everything on this site throughout the year. We hope the committee are not blinded by one man's passion and personal business interests to disregard the local residents' concerns. Badgers. Raw's project management team have gone to great lengths to show their concerns for the known protected species present, mainly the bat populations and the badger sets on the eastern boundary, which some of you saw this morning. That's because they are well documented and not in the way of this scheme. Strange, they still appear very reluctant to acknowledge the presence of several existing sets on the overgrown track on the western boundary. That is probably because they failed to have an accurate ecological survey carried out prior to the creation and design of this scheme. The outlier sets are right where they propose to upgrade this track to enable access for staff and emergency vehicles, and that would destroy these sets. According to the project manager, the outlier sets to the east is a set, but these to the western track are just holes. Hate to point out the obvious, but holes is what badgers do live in. These western boundary holes have been lived in for the past 5 years. I've been monitoring them, and they certainly did not migrate here because of the drought, as was previously suggested to this committee. I should also point out that regarding planning requirements and protection, Natural England do not differentiate between main sets and outlier sets. Natural England states it is the overriding responsibility of the planning authority to consider whether any development will result in significant negative environmental impacts and to ensure that these developments are avoided wherever possible. So basically, as Raw's plans still involve the complete upgrade of this existing rough track for emergency vehicle access, granting planning approval for this scheme, as it is, would mean the planning committee were approving the Raw to break the law. The history. Our concerns relating wildlife predate this planning application, with what appears to be unlawful acts from February 2021. We observed then Raw staff draining a huge pond on this site, to the south of this site, and stripping out all the vegetation on the adjacent bank. In April, we witnessed a pond survey being carried out on that same drained pond. After much questioning by myself, the pond was refilled in May. Our concern is that this unlawful activity was carried out to make the pond appear unsuitable for great crested newts. Now, in March, trees were cleared at the top of the site of the Deer Park, with several huge rooted stumps removed. I was given conflicting information, with this being wind-damaged conifers to wind-damaged ash by another. When these expansion plans were submitted eventually, the designs revealed a public entrance is located exactly where this tree felling had taken place, and so reported that conveniently no further trees will be removed. All of this was reported to Natural England, the local police, local tree wardens, and the planning enforcement officer, Mr. Kenny. The planning enforcement officer was concerned and said he would issue a formal warning in the hope they would be more responsible in future. Their history with ecological concerns and their present attitude towards badger sets is evidence that the planning authority needs to ensure wildlife is suitably protected prior to issuing any consent for development. I strongly believe that role have been failed by their project management team, failed to recognise the serious implications to protect
That is your 5
wildlife,
minutes. Thank
and
you.
failed to acknowledge close presence of local residents. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Do any councillors have questions for the speaker, please? No? The next speaker then, please.
This application does not meet the planning policy framework of achieving sustainable development, promoting sustainable transport, policy TS3 on highway safety, or the Joint Core Strategy Policy 6. Noise complaints. The council have records of 8 investigations into noise concerns dating back to 2018, some of which involve multiple local residents and extended for many months. This is even with all the lockdowns during this period when RAW were closed. If a premises is under investigation, then incidents of noise are collectively looked at as a matter of ongoing activity. The environmental health officer only starts a new investigation after a previous one has concluded, and activity has returned and escalated in terms of intensity. In addition, there have been at least 20 separate complaints directly to RAW not involving the council, and over 30 noise app recordings submitted. And yet, it wasn't until RAW revealed their expansion plans, resulting in many local objections, that the owners saw fit to address the ongoing noise issues on the advice of their acoustic specialist and their planning agent. Their previous noise levels had very significant impacts, as admitted by John Jennings, their planning agent, at the last meeting, which is evidence that this level cannot be used as a baseline for their expansion noise. We request that an updated ambient noise baseline assessment to measure the current noise level. We request a condition that requires mitigation of screams and hubbub from their visitors, as this expansion brings visitors on rides and gathering much closer to our properties and is a significant concern that is not addressed by the noise management plan. A 2-metre acoustic fence on top of a 4-metre earth bund around the perimeter of the site where it joins neighbours' land will go a significant way to address this. Because of the history of noise nuisance from the applicant and their failure to address this, we believe it is essential that a condition of approval should be ongoing noise monitoring, analysis and subsequent mitigation, in addition to the noise management plan, which solely addresses loudspeakers. Residents should be able to enjoy the whole of their property unhindered. Noise from RAW doesn't just affect the immediate neighbours, it is a wider problem. Visual impact. The report states that we will expect major to moderate adverse effects in the loss of our current views. It is important to note that the track ride at the top of the site, which was mentioned in the previous meeting as being 3 metres in height, will have 6 themed areas around it that are 5 metres tall. This is not included in the drawing showing the progression of heights across the site. Many of the rides and features will overlook our properties, causing a loss of privacy and will be clearly visible. There is still no details given for the appearance of rides, buildings and features, and stage 3 includes no information for which outline permission could be given, especially as it brings the expansion even closer to our properties. Road safety. The proposed increase in traffic makes road safety and traffic management issues more prevalent, as the Western Hall Road is an extremely dangerous designated HGV route with no pedestrian access. Increasing vehicle movements from 82,000 to 142,000 and using electronic ticketing to narrow these arrivals between 10 and 12 a.m. and departures between 3 and 5 p.m. so that their visitors experience the goal of 5 hours at the attraction will only add to the traffic issues. The provision of a footpath is necessary and reasonable to make this development acceptable, ensuring it meets Policy 6 of the Joint Core Strategy. The Planning Committee have been misled by Raw's representatives as to the viability of the footpath and crossing in Lenwade. Following a recent response from Highways, it is now clear that an off-highways footpath of crushed rock would be suitable and that a crossing on the A1067 is possible. With the Norwich Western Link Road being explored, we request that all signage for Raw direct their visitors via this main road should it be built. Finally, I am supportive of the conditions requested by the parish councils of Western Longville, Great Witchingham and Councillor Peter Bullman. Councillor Hemphill said at the last meeting she was bitterly disappointed by the quality of this application and bitterly disappointed that the applicant hadn't addressed transport and looked to improve the situation. She believes this application goes nowhere towards this county's ambition for sustainable transport and sustainable tourism. I request that if the Planning Committee give approval for this application, it places conditions on the applicant to address all the issues of concern.
Thank
I
you.
ask the committee to reject this application.
Thank you. Councillors, do any of you have a question for the speaker, please? No? Next speaker then, please.
Kate Simons, representing 3 generations at Fairfield House and owner of Round the Woods campsite. Thank you for attending the site visit. There is no provision for noise containment from the site, and the only visual provision on the western boundary is a new native hedge, which has no acoustic properties. You've seen the filtered views in full leaf, however, there are clear views into this site in winter months. As the development site is higher than the bordering woodland at the boundary and rises up from there, with the 10-metre high volcano being imposingly positioned immediately adjacent to our woodland play area and footpath, we do not believe this proposed planting will be sufficient. Added to this, close to the boundary, will be the toilet block, 6.6-metre tall play equipment, and food outlets with covered areas. It is clear that it is going to be a key gathering point for large groups of people, increasing noise and lack of privacy, especially as it is near the gap in the visual planting for staff and emergency access, for which no screening has been included. I see no comment from the fire service as to the suitability of this access track, which I believe is crucial at this planning stage due to the badger sets, trees, and stream. The noise management plan sets out their intentions to control the loudspeaker noise from impacting on the noise-sensitive receptors. However, it is stated that hubbub will be the dominant source of noise and will be considerably higher than mechanical noise at the attractions and from loudspeakers. The increase in noise will be a cumulative effect of hubbub noise, screams, music, and ride noise, and they state that 25% of users scream on a drop ride. With the volcano, jumping pillows, and other rides, we expect a high level of noise to be screaming. The planning authority is required to take into consideration how a new noise-making source relates to the existing sound environment. Screams are clearly very different to background traffic. There is no information in the application relating to acoustic fencing to direct visitor noise back into the individual play elements and rides, as was promised by their agent at the last meeting. Boundary mitigation in the form of abundant fencing is more effective acoustically than individual elements being fenced, although this would be far better than what is currently proposed. This needs to be a condition. With no mitigation for visitors' noise, we are deeply concerned that relying on the noise management plan alone as a condition will be vastly insufficient. Our county wildlife site Woodland has not been considered a relevant noise-sensitive receptor, despite its importance for wildlife. This is in conflict with national guidance stating that planning authorities are required to consider the effect of noise on wildlife, and particular consideration needs to be given to the potential effects of noisy development on international, national, and locally designated sites of importance for biodiversity. RAW's own noise modelling in their environmental statement shows 60 decibels going into this nature reserve, an increase of over 15 decibels above background traffic noise, which will be a major impact and highly perceptible for wildlife and humans, with noise impacting animals escaping predators and birds finding mates. Norfolk Wildlife Trust have requested that the significant increase in noise into this site be addressed, and yet it has not been. The level of noise from their operations previously dramatically affected the behaviour of local residents and caused great stress. I couldn't read to my children outside or garden while Raw had their speakers on, and all windows had to be closed. In their planning agent's own words in the last meeting, their operations had very significant noise impacts, and yet they still were not considered a statutory nuisance or addressed, despite dozens of complaints. This highlights why ongoing monitoring, analysis, and mitigation at the boundary of the woodland and local properties is so important. In a site visit to my property in August 21, Raw's noise consultant stated he was expecting ongoing monitoring to be required as part of their planning consent, and yet this is in direct conflict with his latest claims that monitoring would be problematic. The main reason for this is that they cannot identify which sounds relate to their activities, despite stating in the environmental statement that they were able to identify atypical noises, including mowers and wind, to remove from results of their previous surveys. Raw's current licensing has no restrictions for events and music inside or outside. If this license automatically extended to their expansion site, despite promises to only use it during the daytime and for 6 months of the year, they could hold music-based events at any time and date, as well as holding their annual Halloween event on site. There needs to be a condition to restrict the hours and months this site can be used and the activities allowed, and any license conditions should not be relied on. Unless these concerns are put in as conditions, no matter what they say during the planning application and consultation process, none of it is enforceable.
Thank you. Do any councillors have questions for this speaker, please? No, thank you. If you'd like to take your seats again, please. And if I call up John Jennings, Ollie Jones and Adrian James, please. If you decide in what order you'd like to go, and then you have 5 minutes from when you start each.
Thank you. First, I'd just like to introduce the other consultants. Ollie Jones will be speaking regarding highways, and Adrian James will be speaking regarding the noise impacts of the scheme. I'm John Jennings, the planning consultant for the application. First, I'd like to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak to you on behalf of my clients in relation to the expansion of Raw Dinosaur Adventure. I'm hoping that this morning's site visit allowed you to understand the design of the scheme and how it's been formulated to mitigate the impacts of development on the nearest properties to the application site. The application has also sought to follow the ethos of the existing attraction, which is heavily landscaped and softened by existing planting. This application is also seeking to provide substantial planting in excess of 25,000 trees and shrubs, which, as well as the sustainability and ecological benefits, will mitigate the impact of the scheme from both short and long distance views. Without wishing to repeat my previous presentation, the economic benefits of this scheme must be recognised, with the existing proposed attraction looking to employ 180 full-time equivalent staff, which equates to more than £2 million per annum in wages, the majority of which is spent locally, whilst the attraction will also provide benefits to the local economy from numerous visitors to Norfolk. I've avoided discussing the highway noise impacts of the proposal because these will be detailed by my fellow consultants, Ollie Jones and Adrian James, respectively. However, one issue which was raised at the previous committee related to the sustainability credentials of the site, and it should be reiterated that the existing park has invested heavily in sources of renewable energy, including ground and air source heat pumps, as well as solar panels. Similar technologies will be applied to the current application and will also include the provision of electric car charging points, as well as infrastructure for the charging points to be extended. By its very location, the site is difficult to access by alternative modes of transport to the private car. However, the operators of the park have arranged a preferential rate with a local taxi firm to bring visitors to the site from further afield and also take them back. It must also be recognised that the site is aimed at small children 2 to 11 years, which limits the distance which they can walk or cycle to a facility. In terms of disabled access, the application site includes accessible toilets, and the rides have been designed to be accessible to disabled customers. The gradients and surfaces of the paths have had due regard to the needs of disabled customers also. The facilities proposed will complement those available in the existing attraction, which is about to have a changing places toilet installed. It's important to say the applicants are committed to making the park an enjoyable experience to all customers, regardless of their disabilities. I trust that the above will help you in your deliberations, and I'd like to pass you over to Ollie Jones, who will provide further information regarding the highway impacts of the application.
Okay, thank you. Before you do any councillors have questions for this speaker, please? No, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ollie Jones. I'm a director of Dinosaur Consultant Engineers, and we've been involved with this scheme since its inception, offering assistance on highways, drainage, nutrient neutrality, and offering general assistance from a civil engineering perspective. The main purpose of me speaking to you today is to discuss the highway implications, most notably of which is the footpath route, which was previously discussed at the last committee meeting. Since that meeting, we've looked deeper at the potential options available to our client and investigated all possibilities. We've submitted our findings to the Planning Officer via a letter recently. Most of these findings are in line with previously submitted documents. However, conversations and correspondence have been floating around regarding the potential of a footpath routing and different options. It should be known that the original correspondence from NTC Highways was for a footpath that is not for public use. It is to aid staff getting to site. However, we looked at all opportunities and reviewed footpath routes for staff and the general public visiting the facility. This included discussions with First Buses, who came back to the conclusion that they would not be supportive of the new bus stop at Raw. This is due to the cost of this, which is in excess of £200,000 per year directly to First Buses. Based on previous trial schemes by Raw at their own cost, less than 1% of their visitors took up this scheme to use a bus. Raw has therefore opted to provide preferential rates with ABC taxis from Norwich for use of their electric vehicle rates to and from the facility. There are two options for a footpath which need to be considered, both of which are in private land outside of Raw's control and Norfolk Highways control. Option 1 is a footpath along the B1535, and option 2 is a footpath through the wooded area and the golf club. Option 1 would result in approximately 4 metres of existing woodland adjacent to the B1535 being removed. This, as we've seen previously, is a TPO area as well. This would need to be an elevated footpath and available for cycleways and footpath use. Option 2 is a footpath from Raw to the A1067, which would need to pass through the adjacent golf club. With this being the golf club, the path would need to also pass away from the activity area, which would mean the woodland area closest to the B1535. As stated in previous correspondence, a 3-metre wide footpath would be required to enable all users of wheelchairs, mobility scooters, bicycles and pushchairs to use this path. The dense, ecologically rich woodland, which has already been stated as housing colonies of bats, which have already been found on the adjacent Raw site. The removal of these trees would undoubtedly be seen as ecologically unsustainable. Due to the nature of the trees, any route would need to be classified as a no-dig construction and drained accordingly, which would inevitably lead to more destruction of habitats and woodland in this area. Correspondence has been provided by John Kerr of Royal Norwich, and this covers the routes that we've just discussed above, and also it should be recognised that previous comments that were held in the committee should be disregarded and follow the correspondence provided by John Kerr set out in his letter. Any possible provision of a footpath through Royal Norwich would need to be covered by Norfolk County Highways in terms of cost, liability and insurance, both during construction and post-use. The security risks posed by a path going through the woodland are a major concern to the golf club. If the path was just for staff, its minimal use would need to ensure that it was locked to the general public, which would inevitably weigh against the ecological harm and the use of this footpath. Previous schemes and conversations have been held around the crossing to the A1067 and the bus stops along this road. At present, there are 2 bus stops, one on either side of the road. Both of these would require some form of upgrade to sustain a bus stop and a pull-in place for the buses, and then road crossings to achieve the pedestrian safety required. This would be recognised in any form of safety audit undertaken as part of a highway scheme. That audit would no doubt recommend the need for a pedestrian crossing and potentially traffic lights along the A1067, which is a significant route in and out of Norwich and Fakenham, North Norfolk and beyond, and would result in the slowing up of journey times. I'm happy to answer any questions from you today, and as stated previously, all findings of this investigation have been included in letters submitted to the Planning Authority. And it should be noted that one point which has not been mentioned yet is that prior to this scheme being undertaken, Raw met with NCC Highways Director and Assistant Director to ensure that we undertook the necessary schemes, the necessary investigation work to ensure that the application put all the information in front of you today that you see. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, do any of you have questions for the speaker, please? Yes, Councillor Beadle.
Thank you, Chair. I may have misheard, but I think the speaker said that the footpath had to be 4 metres wide. Now, we had a big estate development approved last week, and the footpath on one side of the road was only 1.4.
The footpath wouldn't need to be 4 metres wide. It would need to be provision of 3 metres wide and then a construction space. So the space needed to be cleared next to the road for the widening of the footpath would be closer to 4 metres than 3 metres.
Chair, that still is completely different to a big estate development we approved last week, significantly wider. And the estate development last week, it was actually the curb of the footpath was the curb of the road.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for the speaker, please? No, thank you. Right, next speaker, please.
Thank you. I'm Adrian James. I'm an acoustics consultant. First of all, I'd like to discuss briefly the noise assessment itself before moving on to some of the questions that have been raised at the last meeting. Our assessment was absolutely in accordance with national planning guidance and standards. We used sources which were measured at similar attractions with the same age profile as proposed here, that is up to 10 years old, of very few children over that age. We included sound from children on the rides, including the drop tower and the general hubbub of people in the park. The resulting sound levels are all well below the 50 dB level at which the World Health Organization guidelines state that moderate annoyance might occur. They're also below the existing ambient sound levels at each of the receptors, and that is an important point. Under the national planning guidance, this would be at or below the lowest observed adverse effect level at which no additional mitigation is required. Western Longville Parish Council's own acoustics consultants, Sharps Redmore, have reviewed our assessment and agreed with our measurements, our calculations, and our results. Now, that might be new information to some of you because, in fact, that has not been put forward or referred to in any of the representations of the Parish Council to this committee. But it is important to realise that there is absolutely no evidence to support some of the claims that have been made that noise from the application site, as reported in our environmental statement, is somehow underestimated or understated. Addressing the specific issues raised at the committee last month, of course, yes, activities in the existing park already have planning consent, and historically there have been complaints, particularly about noise from loudspeakers generating the dinosaur roars. Council officers have investigated these complaints on numerous occasions, and on each occasion they have found that there is no statutory nuisance. They've not served an abatement notice. Nonetheless, we have provided a noise management plan which applies to the existing park as well as to the application side. This requires that noise from loudspeakers would be effectively inaudible at the receptors. Implementation of this plan has already resulted in a significant reduction in complaints. Following that, paradoxically, several people have now claimed that our baseline noise levels are now unrepresentative because the noise from the roars has been reduced. I can follow the logic of it, but it is wrong. The fact is that the noise levels from the roars, while occasionally audible, are well below the levels from other sources, including road traffic, and hence they're simply not measurable. You can hear them, but the fact that you can hear something doesn't mean that it's measurable. This was actually confirmed again by the Parish Council's own acoustics consultants, who carried out their own baseline noise level measurements at times when the dinosaur roars, they said, were inaudible, and they got exactly the same results as we did. Coming on to noise in other locations than the receptors, in accordance with the national planning guidance, we assessed at dwellings, including the yurts, and at what are known as adjacent external living areas, such as patios. It's been suggested that, in fact, we should have assessed also at those parts of gardens closest to the site boundary. But these are not external living areas, as set out in the planning guidance, and to do this would effectively impose a boundary noise condition on the site, which is contrary to the recommendations in the noise policy statement for England and in the WHO guidelines. In particular, the woodland in the glamping site is actually part of commercial premises. It's not an external living area, and I would expect noise from children playing in that area to be higher for other use of the glamping site than noise from the dinosaur park itself. The Parish Council has also requested additional mitigation in the form of a 4-metre high bund and fencing to provide acoustic screening instead of the planting that they say has been assumed. In fact, we've not assumed any screening from any planting because significant acoustic screening simply does not arise from rows of trees or bushes. The Parish Council has also requested a noise monitoring strategy to ensure that noise levels don't exceed those in the report. I've already mentioned that. You simply cannot measure noise levels which are below the existing ambient noise levels. Such a condition, if applied, would fail to meet the NPPF test for planning conditions, which must be necessary, enforceable and precise. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, do any of you have questions for the speaker, please? Yes, Councillor Holland.
You said the noise level is 50 decibels is where there can be some annoyance. What is the measurement, did you say, for you're expecting from this development?
Right, the noise levels that we're expecting for these development at each of the receptors does not exceed 45 dB anyway. So WHO guidance and actually British Standard 8233 both state that noise in external areas, outside houses, on balconies, in gardens and so on, generally does not cause moderate annoyance until 50 dB. So we're 5 dB below that.
Thank you. Any further questions from councillors, please? No? Yes, Councillor Beale.
On that, noise pollution is judgmental. It's I live in a very rural area, and I live about 4 miles as a crow flies from the shooting range at Taveram. Now I can hear it quite clearly on a Sunday afternoon, quite clearly. And on one occasion, I drove to the shooting range to see where the greatest disturbance was. About half a mile away, on the crest of a small rise, I thought that was the greatest disturbance, half a mile from where I live. As I got closer to the site, there was more background noise, and the disturbance there, I judged to be nowhere as near, simply because the background noise was so much higher. And I would have thought in this vicinity, the background noise is relatively low. You've got the Fakenham Road there, and that will give some measure of background noise. But the fact that it's actually the measurements are below the internationally recognised standard doesn't mean to say that there's not going to be disturbance. So I would suggest to you, and I'm asking you whether you agree or not, that it's the level of the background noise and the comparable between the peaks and the background noise which causes disturbance.
You're quite right to say that, yes, the subjective reaction to a noise is a function of the background noise. 5 minutes does not really give me time to go through all of the procedure of the noise assessment. But if you refer to the environmental statement, you will see that the process that we followed, set out following the NPPF process, was to establish the background noise baseline. So we measured background noise. I spent quite a few days on and around site measuring that. And that the test for what we refer to as observed adverse effect level is actually the difference between the predicted noise from the site and the background noise site as it already exists. In this case, as I mentioned at the beginning, the predicted noise from the site is actually below the existing background noise level. That doesn't mean that you won't be able to hear it. It does mean that it won't be at such a high level as to cause what would normally be considered to be a moderate annoyance as set out by the WHO. So there are two things. There's a comparative noise level against the background noise level, which we've assessed, and also then to put it into context in terms of absolute noise levels, I've referred to the 50 dB set out in the WHO guidelines. Noise is difficult to assess from that point of view, but that's why we have these guidelines and the NPPF and the NPSE. I'm sure that the council officers would be able to confirm that this is actually the procedure that's followed for any noise assessment for an environmental statement.
Thank you. Councillor Karimi. Councillor.
Thank you. The measurement you said about 50 decibels, does that take into account children screaming? The reason I ask is I measured my granddaughter, my 3.5-year-old granddaughter at the weekend, and she was 83 decibels just shouting, and that's not screaming.
But the question is, did you measure it 150 metres away?
No.
Now, when I measured the noise at the drop tower, I did so at the Great Yarmouth Pleasure Beach. They have an enormous drop tower there, and there's an incredible amount of screaming from that. It's 20 metres high. You've got 20 or so teenagers and young adults on it, and I wouldn't want to be on it because they generate a lot of noise. Yes, there's much screaming from that. What we're talking about is the equivalent of the little drop tower that they have there, which is a total of 8 metres high. It drops from 8 metres, and it actually drops very gently. There's a height restriction on it so that children above a certain height, and therefore you assume above a certain age, they also say, I think it's not suitable for children over 12 years old, don't go on it. And the kids are terrified. They're sitting there like that. I was on the site for some time and assessing this because, to be honest, at the beginning of this, I was worried, there could be a lot of screaming. I had just done the noise assessment elsewhere where there was a problem like this. About 2 of the children at any one time, screamed is probably the right word, but squeak would probably be more effective. It wasn't hugely loud. I can understand concern that you're going to get the kind of noise that you get from the adrenaline rides at Alton Towers or something like that, but it's not that kind of thing. These are very young children. They're not being exposed to terrible fright or danger or rides like that. So yes, and if you do get a noise level of a single child screaming fairly enthusiastically at a distance of 1 meter, will generate noise levels around about 80, 85 dB. A distance of 100 meters, that comes down to 45, and we're more than 100 meters away.
Thank you. Any final questions for this speaker? No, thank you. If you gentlemen would like to take your seats again, please. And if Councillor Bullman would like to come forward. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Councillor. You have 5 minutes.
Well, you'll be delighted to see I haven't got any written notes in front of me, so I'm not going to read anything out. I'm just going to speak from the heart. But first of all, let me thank the committee for actually taking up my suggestion, which was to go to a site visit, because quite frankly, photographs and descriptions, although I'm sure they aid your decision making, do not actually take into account the real life situation of being there. And I'm sure when you saw all these facilities and these wonderful things that are going to be developed, you actually were able to put in mind exactly how intrusive some of these are going to be. So we've heard this afternoon, there's no noise issue at all. And yet the strange thing is, do you know, I used to get lots and lots of complaints about noise. So were these complaints unjustified or were they justified? You know, you can hear all sorts of statistics. Somebody once said to me, there are lies, there are damned lies, and there are statistics. And sometimes I do treat statistics with a degree of caution, because although these things can be measured, actually in real life, noise, I am sure, will be an issue. Also, I'm disappointed in the fact that the whole issue of pedestrian access has actually been put to one side, because I do believe that there is an answer there, if only it was pursued with vigour. And yes, it would cost some money. And I don't doubt whatsoever that the golf club would not be prepared to put up the money. Why should they? But on the other hand, why shouldn't the developers who are actually going to benefit from pedestrian access? So I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you have a difficult situation. Nobody you'll have heard this afternoon, nor indeed from any other correspondence, is against this proposal in principle. What they are against is the actual details of how it's implemented. Noise, in my view, has not been sufficiently mitigated. I don't believe the issue of the pedestrian access has been thoroughly explored, and I do believe that these are issues that should be taken into account when you finally make your decision. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Councillor Bullman. Does anybody have questions for the councillor, please? No,
I'm
thank you.
delighted to answer any.
No, he hasn't done it. So if you'd like to resume your seat, please. Thank you. And we have a written representation from Councillor Copplestone, who unfortunately is not able to be here today.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a written representation from Councillor Joe Copplestone as portfolio holder for economic development at Broadland Council. Raw Dinosaur Adventure is Norfolk's #1 visitor attraction and the second most popular attraction in East Anglia. The objective to make this site the UK's most popular dinosaur-themed visitor attraction should be applauded. In terms of economic development, Raw Dinosaur Adventure is a success story. In 2006, the park employed 12 people and attracted 140,000 visitors annually. Now there are 46 permanent salaried staff, plus between 50 and 150 additional seasonal staff, and it attracts some 300,000 visitors annually in a normal year. The existing park is open daily throughout the year, unlike most theme and amusement parks, which enables the operators to offer continuous employment even to the part-time and seasonal staff. It is of note that the seasonal and permanent staff remain employed by the park for an average employment length of 10 years. This application will seek to increase the number of visitors from 300,000 to 500,000 per annum. This will have additional benefits for the local economy and the number of holidaymakers visiting Norfolk. One of the aims of the facility is to attract visitors from further afield, increasing expenditure outside Norfolk. Although the area subject to the planning application will only operate April to October, it will generate more visitors and enable additional employment opportunities. The number of staff will increase to 51 permanent salaried staff and 200 seasonal staff during peak periods. The number of full-time equivalent jobs will increase to 180 on completion of the development. The current wages alone provided by the business are 1.525 million per annum, which equates to 962,500 for permanent staff and 558,000 for seasonal staff. The majority of this is spent within Norfolk. The additional staff associated with this application will increase this figure to nearly £2 million. The project before you will, in its initial phase, require a further investment of some £4 million, in addition to the £9 million already invested in the park. The later phases are likely to require a similar level of investment. There will be economic benefits associated with the construction of the park, with the applicants being committed to the use of local contractors. Additional jobs will be created to supply and service the park. The economic benefits of this project are considerable, and approving this application will demonstrate that the Council is committed to supporting local businesses and attracting inward investment. This proposal will also result in significant additional expenditure within Norfolk and associated employment opportunities. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, now it's over to you, councillors, for your comments and deliberation. Yes, Councillor Karimi and then Councillor Fisher.
I probably missed this, but the moth meadow next to the car park, overflow car park, is that going to be separated with some sort of fence so people don't walk through it into the new area? I noticed there were badger sets there.
More than likely, yeah, to keep that degree of disturbance out, but we'd look to wrap that up in a landscaping condition that requires details of things like fencing to be confirmed in due course.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the site visit this morning was very informative and useful. In the aspect, it did give us a good idea of the distance actually from the attraction to the neighbouring dwellings, and if anything, identified that as being actually longer and more distance than I felt last month when we were discussing it. So I'm pleased that Councillor Bullman suggested we did have a site visit, because it was a difficult and is a difficult site to actually to assess. And I'm interested that Councillor Bullman has just now said that in fact there's not an objection to this in principle. And I can understand that because this is an important attraction. It's an important employer, and I know people that visit this on a regular basis. And I think when you're looking at an attraction like this, there is a need to improve and change the rides, make them more attractive, so that if you've got people visiting on a regular basis, the next year they visit, there's something new to look at. And I think we have to bear that in mind. I welcome the moth meadow and the planting. I think there has been thought put into that, and that does enhance what we do know to be a large Barbasol bat colony. I think when you look also at the conclusions, then all of the list of conditions suggested that are considered by the Assistant Director of Planning, if this is approved, I believe there's something like, I think, 30 conditions. And we know that there has been representatives made to the Environment Department about current noise levels, which have been investigated. And that option is always open to the future. So on balance, now I believe I'm happy to recommend and support the officer recommendation for approval. It is, I fully understand the parish council point of view and the neighbours, but I think on the assessment that I've seen this morning, I believe the distance between the sites is sufficient, that there will be no major impact on those dwellings. And in fact, looking from an economic point of view, I believe this deserves support. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and I'm happy to second that. I think the effect on surrounding properties will be minimal, and the footpath is really a non-starter given all the considerations. A lot of major attractions don't have footpaths to them. I was in Felbrig last week. There's no footpath down to Felbrig. If you walk there, you walk in the road with some care, as you do to a lot of these other major attractions. Right, Councillor Prutton.
I may have, I hope I haven't missed the boat. I may have, perhaps should have asked my question of the residents earlier, but the nature of the complaints about the noise, I would be curious to know as if it was against the noise of the potential customers, against the roars, or against the music, which the music surprised me when I got out of the car this morning. And I did find that jarred. I may not be asking the right people, and if I'm late asking my question, I apologise. But can you clarify what the nature of the noise is that people are objecting to? Thank you.
First of all, I hope I'm accurately portraying what you've objected on, and I apologise if I misconstrue that, but I'll give it my best shot anyway. I think there is the general things like the pneumatic pump of the drop ride. They're concerned about noise from children screaming, as Ms. Simon said, from the rides, and the general sort of shouting of people to and from each other, and the general activity associated with that, as well as during the construction phase of the application as well. Some of the noises associated with that. Hopefully that's about on the money for you.
Thank you. No, you can't speak from the public. I'm sorry. Right. Okay. Right. Councillor Fisher, can you turn your microphone off, please? Councillor Karimi.
I think Sue was referring to existing complaints, not future. What have been in the past complaints of noise?
Sorry.
On what sort of basis would people have complained? All right, then, in the past, what was the nature of complaints?
Yeah,
those proportions: people, music, animals.
Okay. My understanding is that a lot of it was related to things like dinosaur roars, and audio equipment around the site as well, being turned up at a high volume.
I certainly confess when I got out of the car to find that there was going to be background music, that did surprise me. And okay, but thank you for the clarification.
I believe that once we were at those properties opposite, though, we didn't hear any background music. I certainly couldn't hear any. Right. Yes, Councillor Holland.
Yeah, I'm still slightly concerned about this emergency exit that they're talking about, because when you looked at it, there seemed to be trees along that route. And obviously, I understand that people are concerned about the badger sets which are around there. So is there some way of protecting or making sure that those things are not interfered with when they try to construct some new form of emergency exit?
Do you mean the badger sets? Okay. Yeah, I mean, the information on badger sets, the neighbours provided quite an amount of information on badger sets, which in turn the applicant's own ecologist has looked at and recently submitted information on, and I referred to that during the site visit. That's with our ecologist at the moment, and we'll wait to get her feedback on that and any conditions that she wishes to recommend in that regard, and that's reflected in the recommendation. And for trees, one of the conditions is a tree protection condition, and we'll look to wrap up any tree protection measures in that with a submission of, say, a tree protection plan.
I've got Councillor Beadle, then Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. Trying to cover if anything goes wrong in the future. The planting scheme. I've had a case in my ward where it's a condition of the development that the screening, the existing screening, which should be kept, and the approval was in as laid out on this attached plans. Now, that screening in this particular case was substantially removed, and I was told that the enforcement team could not take no action because the plan was not enforceable. What indication, what can this committee do to actually make sure all the drawings are actually enforceable? Because these are important in this scheme. That's the first one, Chair. The second one is on noise. If it gets out of hand, however you define that, how can we enforce the operators to reduce the noise? And the third one is the bunds are actually there, so we're informed, to aid the screening, not for the noise. Now, on certain areas of a neighbour's property, you could actually see right into this site, and it's going to take some time for the screening to actually become effective. So I would like to propose an amendment, Chairman, that the bunds are raised an additional metre high. So that now I understand that these are quite wide. I've seen the cross sections of quite wide screening bunds, but I think that's quite doable and quite possible. And I'd even go further and say they're quite necessary.
Okay, I'll try and remember those questions as best as I can, hopefully in the right order as well. Thank you. Thank you. In respect of the landscaping, there is a standard set of wording that we can use to secure the future maintenance and management of the landscaping that's imposed. So it could include the submission of a management plan or a maintenance plan that we will approve and that will have to be adhered to in the future. I'm going to move to the bunds before I come back to the noise. So for the bunds, I think it's important to bear in mind that it's not a recommendation either in the noise report or by our health officer that the bunds are increased in height or even there to provide noise mitigation. They're not required to provide noise mitigation, only elevation of the landscaping. So if there's no recommendation for that bund to be there for noise mitigation, then why do you want it to be higher than it is? And then you'll have to remind what was the noise condition. What was the noise one, please?
How do you enforce it? And I'll come back to the bunds again, Chairman.
Sorry, in respect of the noise condition, how do we enforce it? Well, there's The applicant has said in the noise management report, or Adrian James on behalf of the applicant in the noise management report, which is summarised in the addendum, that we will do this, and this. We can use a planning condition that says you will do this, and this. And if they don't do this, and this, we'll enforce against that. And that's quite acceptable to do that with the advice of our environmental health officer.
Thank you, Chair. If I can come back to this bund issue, I did not say that was the reason for increasing the height of the bunds. You made it quite clear in your presentation that the height of the bunds was to raise the height of the screening. I think, as I said, there are certain places in the adjoining properties where you can see right onto this site above the proposed bund level, and it would be 3 or 4 metres on top of the bund before the screening takes effect. And I would suspect the drop, it's going to be visible at some significantly greater height than that. So the intention of raising the level of the bunds is to actually raise the level of the screening.
Okay, I mean, I would simply say in response to that, that the landscape architect considered the application when he worked for the council. He considered the landscape mitigation measures were acceptable, and it's worth bearing. I appreciate what you're saying about it taking time for the planting to be to mature, but nevertheless, from the outset, when they construct the bund, 12, 4 and 4.5 metre high trees are going to be planted on that, which will soften views and in time establish and help to soften views further. But I appreciate the point you're making, and that's perhaps something you need to debate amongst yourselves as members.
Thank you, Chair. I am actually proposing that the bunds should be increased by additional metre high, and I'm seeking a seconder.
Are you seconding that, Councillor? Proposed and seconded that we put a condition on that the bund is increased by another metre. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4.
All those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Right, and I will vote against. So that is your proposal is lost. Thank you. Right, Councillor Leggett, you wanted to speak.
Thank you. Well, the previous councillor dealt with one of the issues, because the issues for me are noise and the paths, and it is a great balance. And there's the economic side, and of course there's the disturbance to the amenity. But I do support that the question of the bund, because I didn't think it was noise. I thought it was the vision, and there were gaps. But unfortunately, you've very quickly proposed and had this voted for, so I don't suppose that I can push that much further. On the path, though, yes, this has come up before, that if highways find a reason that isn't. But what will happen is it will have to wait for a serious accident to happen, and then somebody will probably come back on the paths. But I don't suppose anything that I can say or do is going to alter the situations on the paths. But I was sorry that we weren't able to give more consideration to the bund, because I think that would have helped. Okay, I agree at the top it is 11 metres wide, which probably, even that seemed a little bit delicate to me, but there are, from what I understood by asking questions, that was going to be adequate. So that's my position at the moment, Chairman. Thank you.
Any further comments before we go to the vote? No. Well, it's proposed by Councillor Fisher, seconded by myself, that we go with officers' recommendations as set out on page 17 and 18. All those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Chairman.
Against? Abstentions? One abstention. Right, so that is carried. Thank you.
Do you want to a minute's break? Or just sit 1 hour?
Yeah, we'll have a few minutes comfort break. Thank you. Okay, councillors, the next application, 20221273, Drayton Drury. Applicant is Broadland District Council. So pass you over to Peter Curson. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. So item number 2, we've got Drayton Drury. So we've got the creation of a car park, form an earth bund, and installation of height barrier. So looking at the site location, this is a Broadland District Council site, hence its reason for coming through committee today. It's located just north of the Broadland Northway, the NDR, on an area of land that was formerly a site compound when it was being constructed. It's currently informally being used as a car park now. I think many of you might have driven past it on your way back here from the site visit this morning. So it will be aware of where it is. It's currently being used by members of the public to access the right-of-way into the County Wildlife Site, and past that there is some access into the new country park as well. So coming down into the site is accessed almost directly from the Broadland Northway roundabout on the Reefham Road. You come off the road and onto the right-of-way and then into the car park. So there is some landscaping around it from the Broadland Northway, particularly to the east. There's quite a lot of new tree planting associated with it. And this indicates the connections to the rights of way, bridle ways that the car park serves. So moving on to the proposal itself, as I said, at the moment it's quite an informal area. You'd have probably noticed on the way past this morning, there's quite a lot of puddles when it rains, and so it's not particularly user friendly, especially in winter at the moment. So this proposal, with the height barrier in to restrict access, to formalise the use a little bit more, to improve the actual surfacing with hardcore, so it'll be permeable but more solid than what's there and more durable. An earth bund to form an extra bit of landscaping along the northern side, and then there's a soakaway proposed to catch that surface water, to prevent the sort of puddling water that's there at the moment. So moving on to some photos of the site. This is looking around the access from the Broadland Northway, and then looking towards the site. As you can see, it's well used even in its current informal state. The public right-of-way runs straight on when you're looking at this particular image. Again, view from inside the site on a drier time than it was today. And again, more views looking inside with the woodland in the background, and looking back towards the Broadland Northway from inside the site across the verge. So, in essence, it's a reasonably simple proposal. It's a site that is in use. This is formalising that use into something that's more user friendly, more publicly accessible, improving access to rights of way, improving its viewpoints in the landscape. There's no objection from Highways, subject to a condition which is recommended on the decision notice, relating to the parking availability. And as such, the recommendation is for approval.
Thank you. If councillors have any questions for the officer, I'll just point out we also have Helen Sibley here today on behalf of the applicant, i.e. Broadland District Council, should we have any further questions. Councillor Karimi.
Is there going to be a proper hard standing for the food truck that's always there? Is that going to have a specific place now?
Not a dedicated place, because that's an informal use doesn't need and hasn't got planning consent. So they can use.
So they just turn up when they want to.
They can turn up. Yep.
And they're allowed to do that.
They are at their present.
Okay. All right.
And they don't enforce food bans on them. And they don't charge premiums at that bank.
But excuse me, would you like to come to the microphone so we can hear you? That'd be better. Yeah. No.
Chair,
I'm just thinking when.
on a
Sorry,
point
Stuart,
of-
I'm finished.
On a point of order, could I ask the applicant to make a proposal and then we can ask her questions?
The applicant doesn't wish to speak. She's only here to answer questions. Right. Do you want to just repeat what you said? Thank you.
Yeah, Norfolk County Council control the land, and the food vans, they don't enforce anything there, so they haven't got a permit, but county don't ask them to, they're happy for them to stay there, but there's no sort of formal permissions on there at the moment, but we don't intend to prevent that from continuing. The car park will be created and the space will still be there that the burger van can continue to operate on that site if they wish to. We don't want to upset people's businesses and income.
I'm just thinking when there's car boot sales now have started on that field next door, there could be loads of catering vans turn up and then there's going to be no space for the cars to park there.
We will be putting, so the car park will be designed in such a way that there's a byway going along the top section of the site. And so that top sort of section is a byway. We can't close that off. The height barrier, we will have a height barrier into the actual car park itself. So we will just control the car park bit that we are going to create, the byway. And if people park on that or restrict that, they won't be allowed to do that because it's a right of way.
Okay. Any further questions either for the officer or yes, sir?
This is to do with the creation of a car park. And is there any thing going to be done to surface that area, to secure the surface so that it's not a danger for cars to park there eventually because of craters forming in the earth from the mud and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so that's the whole reason for this application is we're aware that it's heavily used. It's not, as we call it, it's a non-car park, but it's being used as a car park. It's happened over time and people have got used to using it. So we're aware of the issues with potholes at present, and we get a lot of complaints, even though it's not our land that we control. But we see it as a vital point for green infrastructure in the area because it's right next to the cycleways. It's next to a woodland that is accessible through to the Broadland Country Park. There's also links into Drayton parish as well, and there'll be future projects coming in to improve those links from Drayton and Tavenham up onto this area as well. So it links into future GI that we were planning to deliver in the area, and this is like a kind of the first stage to make this area safe and easier to use, because at present when you go in there you quite easily ground out your car. So we felt this was a good first stage to get this formalised and safer to use for the public.
Councillor Beadle.
Chairman, the officer is completely right. It is a very well used informal car park. It has been surfaced to some standard or other in the past, and it is potholed to say the least. I noticed from the application it's for 25 vehicle parking areas. Now, there are a lot more than that turn up to use that woodland than 25. And I see from the drawing there, you've got a 2-lane service road to the Drayton Drury. Now, you need 2 lanes. With the position of that in and out to the car park, there'll be cars passing. So you need 2 lanes. But as sure as eggs are eggs, you'll find people parking on there when the car park is up to its 25 number. And I suspect you'll get even probably 30 in there when they should only be 25. So I actually don't think it's big enough, and it would have been better if the configuration was actually at the end, so you could narrow up the access, because it's only a single vehicle access to the Drayton Drury. So, Chairman, I don't think we can do anything today, but I think it's a less than ideal solution.
Okay, thank you.
I think for clarification, because the council the access is controlled by county rather than Broadland, so that's why it's not included in this application in this instance.
Any further questions from councillors? Well, hopefully, yes. Right. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, then it's over to you, please, councillors. Seconded. Moved by Councillor Fisher, seconded by Councillor Leggett. For the recommendation as set out on page 50, which is to go with officer's recommendation. All in favour, please show. It's unanimous. That's passed. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, go on to appeals on page 51. There aren't any decisions, just a note of 2 appeals lodged there. Any comments from anybody? No? Okay. Declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.